it's my pleasure to introduce Ben Moren. Ben's films, performances, sculptures, sound art, and computational media projects raise questions about the environment, by which I mean things like boreal forests, northern forests, and other ecosystems. Raise questions about how we perceive, understand, document, and represent or simulate nature, quotes, in this strange moment in history where when we perch a very uncertain future that involves things probably, almost certainly, mass extinction and really, really dramatic climate change. So those are the kinds of things that Ben's work engages. Also documentation, time, scales of time, how things seem different and behave differently at those different scales. So I'll recite Ben's many professional solo exhibitions at Mirror Lab in Minneapolis, Keel Gallery, the Rochester Art Center in Rochester, Minnesota, and St. University in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia. Numerous group shows, including at the Midway Contemporary Art Library in Minneapolis, the Minnesota Museum of American Art in St. Paul, Minnesota. I'll tell you what, going forward, if it's in Minneapolis or Minnesota, I'll leave out the location and you can assume. A maze, second word maze, which is the 6th International Game and Playful Media Festival in Johannesburg, South Africa. Northern Spark Festival. Interview Route 11 in Edinburgh, Scotland. Coleman and Pryor Gallery, Rainbelt Bottling House. The 3rd Beijing Film Academy International New Media Art Triennial in, you guessed it, Beijing, China. The Weissman Art Museum. Oregon Independent Film Festival in Eugene and Portland, Oregon. Soap Factory, Stevens Point Sculpture Park in Stevens Point, Wisconsin. And Abteilung für alles andere in Berlin, Germany. Oh, and also in Berlin, Kulturpark, Culture Park. Ben has organized curatorial projects, Wabazi Pinakan Zibi filmmaking residency and screening. Where's that? In Wisconsin. In the Catherine E. Nash Gallery at the University of Minnesota. His work has been supported by the McKnight Foundation, the Jerome Foundation, Silverwood Park Artist Residency, Northern Lights, which is a cool nonprofit, the Minnesota State Arts Board, which I believe supported the publication of his recently published book, Reference Ecosystem Lost 40. The library has a copy. It's in the office. You're welcome to check it out or borrow it. And even have some copies here to sign for you. It's a really beautiful book. And Forecast Public Art and the Bakken Museum. Ben Moren is a full professor of media arts at Minneapolis College of Art and Design, also known as MCAD, where he previously served as associate professor, and before that, assistant professor, visiting professor, even adjunct professor. So, you know, worked his way very quickly, actually, up the academic ladder there. And he received an MFA in experimental media arts at the University of Minnesota and a BFA at Minnesota College of Art and Design. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to an artist whose interests I share, Ben Moren.
Hi, thanks so much for this opportunity to speak, and thanks for the lovely introduction. It's funny to hear all those things the kind of laundry list get said out loud, but it's great to think about some of those opportunities that I've had in the past. Minnesota, just really quick before I jump into this, Minnesota is a very different kind of art world than it is here. We have a different kind of structure that we work inside of, and one of those things is that we have an abundant funding landscape that consists both of state funding and private institutions and foundations. So the McKnight Foundation, the Jerome Foundation, and others have really supported my work, and I just want to thank them in this talk. And then I also want to thank the entire state of Minnesota, because in 2008, there was a vote to make a constitutional amendment to put aside a portion of sales tax towards arts funding directly. And so we have a massive amount of arts funding, which is kind of amazing. So thank you, Minnesota. I'm going to start here. This is the oldest project I want to talk about really quickly. This is called reframes Topography. And I wanted to show this to you because it kind of represents this transition for me into really thinking about the environment of something that can kind of pulled away from itself and thought about a little more independently and in these kind of microcosm spaces. So these are videos on the panel, and on top they have these stacked acrylic topography, which I've located to the top of the stones within rivers. These are all rivers that are part of the Mississippi watershed, which obviously, but pretty much all of our watershed goes that direction. And I was really interested in this kind of idea of sitting over a body of water and looking into that space, whether it's a reflection of yourself or just having these meditative moments where you kind of get lost in that space, almost like a fire. And one of the things that's really strange about television is that we have a similar kind of relationship, right? Like space and go kind of get lost in it. And they both have these surfaces that are these reflective kind of transits. One of my favorite things about this piece is that when people enter into the space, they oftentimes try to reach into the TV, the surface of the screen, it's like the water, which is a bit of a happenstance. I was really originally super interested in this extrusion of trying to optically pull the stones back into three dimensions in the three-dimensional space, which it does work. It's very hard to convey on the video, but so for me, this is all about building environment and trying to think about what are the kind of important pieces of a river out in the world, and how do I bring these back to this space without exactly bringing just back the river to the space. These are infinite loops, and so it just becomes this kind of meditative environment. So more recently, I've gotten interested in working with these kind of generative adversarial networks, or these AI systems. And I had been working on a project quite a long time ago where I was photographing aspen trees. And some of you may be familiar, aspen trees are what's called a clonal colony. They are essentially sprouted up from the same tree, and so they're genetically identical. So you could have a giant stand of aspen trees that are all genetically identical, essentially. And I got really fascinated with this idea of something that's both independent, its own tree, but then also part of this larger rhizomatic network. And so I was photographing all these trees, and I was building software to compress them. And then this kind of world of generative adversarial networks came along, and it gave me the tools to do what I really always wanted to do, which is to kind of be able to generate those trees in infinite space. So I took those images of trees, several thousand images of aspen trees and trained a GAN on them. And it's all seasons. And so this is a latent walk through that space. And for those of you that have not played around with any of this kind of like AI stuff or these kind of generative spaces yet, a really good way of thinking about how generative image making works in the AI space is it's essentially like reverse image recognition. So if a computer is kind of like looking at the world and saying, you know, this is a tree, this is a tree, this is a tree, what you're essentially doing is saying, how do you see that that's a tree? Show me what you think a tree actually looks like, and it will give you back some data, which can then be re-rendered into an image. And so, you know, I essentially fed in this network that says, this is what I think an aspen tree should look like, and then show me back an image of what you think these trees should look like. And the interesting thing is that you can create a constellation of those images and move through them. And as you move through them, they create these perfect kind of undulating, transitioning animations. So I love this because, you know, the aspen trees have these eyes that grow on them. It's the spot where the lower branches will drop. It's essentially like a self-pruning process that the aspen trees go through. And so I love this idea that this tree is kind of self-pruning or kind of generating and regrowing in and of itself. And it's made of this mass of all these images from these clonal colonies and then compressed back into a single tree. So you get this kind of big gesture and small gesture all at the same time. And here you can see it's transitioned from summer to winter also slowly in the background. So that was one of my earlier experiments with this, and I'm always thinking about life scale immersive projection. So, you know, this is a gallery space. This is probably like 9 feet high or something, you know, like a big projection like this. And I love it when projections can start at the floor and you can really get viewers kind of in the space as much as possible, fill the peripheral vision, that sort of thing. Which then brings me to this project, which is the book, and the subsequent hundreds of thousands of, I don't even know how many images that I've generated from this data set. But what we're looking at here is one of the images from the book. And the way that this came about is I got really interested in this space in Minnesota called the Lost 40. So Minnesota has a history of logging. But almost the entire state was clear cut, which just means, you know, coming in and cutting down all the trees and extracting all that lumber and shipping it all over the country to build houses. And there's this one special spot in kind of northwestern Minnesota where there was no logging activity because they had mismapped that area as a lake. And so there's 40 acres essentially of old growth red pine forest that had been left behind. And so I was really interested in this idea of this set of trees almost as this kind of map or this remnant of what was there before, you know, essentially everything was clear cut. And so my partner Sarah and I, we went up there and photographed for days and days and days. We made thousands and thousands of photographs of these trees. And again, trained a generative adversarial network on that data set of trees specifically, thinking about this as a kind of act of preservation, documentation, and then also like almost a futile kind of hope that I could regrow the forest that was lost during the turn of the century logging boom. And so these are some of the images. They're categorized by the vantage point. So this is the kind of vista view or the most overview of the forest. And you get a sense of these tall trees and the new undergrowth that's coming in, but it's all distorted and kind of mangled. I took images of single trees, just looking up the trunks, so towards the sky. And one of the things about these images that I really like is that oftentimes the crown on the top is actually just disconnected from the trunk. And so you have this floating kind of tuft of needles up at the top. These are images of the bark, which I think are very convincing as true images of trees or of bark. So this looks like exactly like what red pine bark looks like if you walked up to that tree. But you still get these hints of artifacting in the background. There's something that's still kind of wrong about the image. The more you look at it, the more it starts to fall apart. Focused on the pine needles. So there's red and white pines there, but the kind of classic red pine structure, these like little tufts, these little poofs of needles coming out. And then, of course, because it's a generative network, there's all sorts of spaces in between all of this stuff where things just really fall apart. So, you know, the adversarial network is doing its best to try to classify trees, but sometimes it just thinks that means vertical things going up, and then you get these, what I like to think of these as legs, like walking through the woods, these almost like characters. And so I'm interested in where this falls apart just as much as where it's good at generating images that may make you feel like trees are believable. And I think one of the things that's really hard for me about this project, and I always have a really hard time reconciling it, is that there's not really an end. Like I can just generate 100,000 images right now if I wanted to of this forest. And so it's always begging this question for me of like, what are the boundaries of the project? How do I show it? How do I encompass something that has a literal infinite output? And that's really unresolved. So in some ways, the book was an attempt to try to put some boundaries on this. And I think any other time that I will show these images, it just becomes site responsive, because it's just kind of open-ended where it could go. Yeah, so anyway, this is what the book looks like. I actually really like these grids of images quite a lot, because it gives some of that scale. And when I'm showing these in the exhibition setting, that's something I'm interested in working with, is small 1 inch by 1 inch squares, so that you get the sense of the kind of volume of images that can be generated there. I also like that it calls back to this idea of pixelation, you know, this kind of digital language that we are all really familiar with, as things start to break down and we start to see that kind of digital material that underlays everything. One of the things that if you get the chance to do a project like this ever, one of the things that I would highly recommend to do is to get somebody to write about your work. That's not you. I invited a few folks, and I just want to shout out, this is an essay by Everest Pipkin, who's a fantastic artist, and they wrote this beautiful essay. It's available on artist.com, and it talks a lot about the project. And they're an artist based in New Mexico. They're from Texas originally, so not exactly tied to the project, but they have this very poetic, beautiful way of speaking about the project. It's kind of an amazing experience to put the trust in somebody and see what they come up with. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about that part. But I have books, you should definitely check them out, and check out the one in the library. I can leave some more too. So one of the things that Mark had also introduced is this idea of looking at timescales. And that's something that I'm increasingly looking at in the work. This is a project called Horizon. This is on up in the boreal forest in Minnesota. So this is like just a few miles from Canada. It's way up north. And what we're seeing here is essentially a defocused image of the lake. And this is the middle of winter, and this is it's like an hour and a half, hour and 20-minute long film over the course of a dusk. And the important part of this film is really not the image for me. I just wanted to give you a sense of what this looks like over time. I was really interested in the acoustic phenomena that's happening there. So I think one of the things that we are really kind of ingrained in us is that we should go out into the environment and sort of like hike up the mountain and get this beautiful vista, or like go into the place and see this amazing thing. And I think that that oftentimes leads us past so many other things that are incredible if we just kind of stopped or slowed down and paid maybe more attention to what was just off the trail or, you know, right in front of us, and had a more kind of intentive or practice observation of the space. So where's that video? First one. That's what this sounds like. So this is actually the piece, how it gets installed. And the audio that we're hearing is a reverberation of ice cracking and sending that across the surface of the ice. So essentially the entire lake has an ice membrane on it, right, as it just freezes in and becomes a giant speaker or a giant amplifier. And so as the ice cracks, it just sends these kind of laser-like sounds across it. So I really wanted to focus on this phenomenon because it really only happens for just a few hours right when the lake begins to freeze in. So it's a pretty special moment. And I like the idea of presenting something visual because it's like a hook, right? It gets us into the piece, it gets us thinking about it, but then presenting this audio that's maybe a little bit aside, a little bit something that might have been passed by. So after that piece, I started working on a new film. This one is called Breathing Wilderness. And again, I'm looking at this boreal forest. One of the reasons that I'm kind of captivated by this space is because it's culturally significant in Minnesota. It's what's referred to as the North Woods. And it's one of the southern extents of the boreal forest in Minnesota. And it will also very, 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 it's basically a done deal, be lost in the next 40 to 50 years, meaning that we won't have boreal forests anymore. And so it's just part of the way that climate changes and climate shifts. It wasn't always like that either. So it's not like, I'm not trying to sort of cast that this is a positive or a negative thing, just that it's, you know, it's changing, and it's changing inside of my lifetime, and it's kind of a time frame that I can work inside of, and I think that's pretty fascinating. And so part of this project is looking at time like that, and part of this project is about me trying to engage very directly with it. And I'm not really talking about I have a lot of other kind of performance-based works that if you're interested in the work, I would encourage you to go check them out on my website. But I'm trying to engage again with some of this kind of performative action in the environment. And in this piece, I'm looking at the seasons. So summer, winter, spring, and fall. This is kind of a theme in my work. I'm kind of always thinking about that change in time. And so I shot this film over about a year and a half, including the test footage. And I'm looking at little vignettes essentially of what in the environment seems very special or important to me that I think should be documented or preserved. And it's one of the reasons I wanted to shoot this on 16 millimeter, because if it's treated right, it can be quite a good archival material, in a way that digital material, I'm not sure yet, it's a question mark. Of course, like everything has its time scales and its issues, but there's a longevity there. And I'm gonna throw a little process in here. So these are some shots of working in the forest inside of the Boundary Waters New Area Wilderness, which is about a 1 million acre wilderness area. And I'm shooting here on my camera. And what I'm doing when I'm making these films is that another reason I wanted to use 16 millimeters is because I can manually control the frame rate. And so what I'm doing when I'm shooting is I am breathing very carefully, almost like a breathing exercise you might do in a meditative practice, and ramping the film rate as I'm doing that. So I'm moving between 4 frames per second up to 48 frames per second. So slow motion to fast motion as I'm breathing in and out. And so you get, I'll show you in a second, you get this pulsation of the film that goes from fast motion to slow motion, and also overexposure to underexposure. So the film kind of breathes with me. So all over the place, filming up there on lakes, in the forest, near Lake Superior, trudging through the snow with my dog. And this is what it sounds like. I'm going to turn this down a little bit. It's really loud. It includes a backing audio track as well. Oops. All right, I'm going to pause there. So it's like a 12-minute film, and I wanted to show you one of the transition points there. So each season is shot on a single roll of 16 millimeter film, which is 100 feet, 3.5 minutes. And as you load and unload the camera, the ends get exposed to light. And so those flares essentially represent the end of the roll, and that form that transition between seasons and creates that essentially the loop of the entire film. I really like this idea that you're breathing sort of with the environment, and that it manipulates the camera. Whenever I think about this film, I always think about this Brakhage film called Seeing with One's Own Eyes. Has anybody seen that film? Yeah, it's really intense. It's like a footage of autopsies. And he said that he's trying to hide behind the camera, essentially. So the whole film, he's just sort of shaking, trying to avoid seeing death, or confronting death. And I like the idea of the camera becoming this tool of mediation, or this kind of tool in which you can record the performance of the filmmaker as much as you're recording the image of what you're seeing. And so I'm thinking about this as being, myself in this environment, just as much as I am thinking about capturing this kind of beautiful, pristine wilderness space. So this is really the direction that that film is very new. That just showed for the first time this last summer. But this is really a direction I'm taking my projects in right now. I'm working on these standalone listening devices. And if you've ever had this experience of going out into the world with a field recorder, you'll know the experience, right? You have this like hypersensitive hearing. It's kind of amazing the first time you ever have that. And I want to replicate that so that folks can go out into the world and have this like hypersensitive hearing experience. And so what I've started doing is building these devices that are attuned for specific sites and specific kinds of listening. So this is an oak leaf, a white oak leaf from an oak savanna in northern Minnesota, and not as far north as the boreal forest. And in the oak savanna, so this is like giant oak trees, but then mostly grassland. There's all this insect life, and it's just bursting with a chorus of insects. And so this particular listening device is tuned for listening to those insects. It has a really wide microphone pattern, and it has the microphone frequencies are tuned for listening to that kind of like high-pitched insect. So these you could check them out at the park and go take them around on your walk and go out into the environment. And I like the idea of essentially the inverse of what I'm trying to do in Breathing Wilderness with myself, but giving someone else that moment. You can go out in this space, you can have an experience, and it's almost like giving permission to take that time and take that space in the environment. So this is the first one I did. This one, again, this is with an oak savanna. This is a more recent one. This is the device here. You can come check it out after too, just for a sense of scale. This one is based on a rhyolite rock, which is a particular kind of stone that's really prevalent in Lake Superior. And this one is tuned for listening to the transition between the water and the shore. So again, it's tuned for high frequency, but the microphones are for really close up. So you're meant to get the microphones right into that transition. Here's some photos of, excuse me, my partner, Sarah, using this device, trying it out. We were up there. And again, this was at a gallery space in Grand Marais, Minnesota, called the Grand Marais Art Colony, which has an amazing residency program. If you want to get into like a far off place, it's a good spot to go. And so viewers could check these out and then go out into the environment and experience what was going on. So I'm continuing to work on these right now and various versions of them. This is one I started working on during a residency at the Santa Fe Art Institute, also a great residency program. And this one is kind of geared towards workshops. So the idea is that you would get one of these devices and then attach a microphone that's on a longer cable to it and go out and find like a stick and build your own boom microphone. So then you could go out and mic things up. So it's a little more generic, but we'll have this kind of microphone building workshop component. And then I'm starting to also deviate a little bit. And this is interesting for me personally, because I haven't really spent, I've been spending so much time in northern Minnesota and really focused on that kind of ecology. And when I went and did that residency in Santa Fe, I really got it, like started thinking about what this other environment was like and the kind of political issues that are there. And I got really fascinated with this specific plant called a rubber rabbit bush. And specifically because of this hiking trail and this space near Los Alamos National Laboratory. This is site 10 on the Bio Canyon Trail. And right where this little gray marker is, this is a remediated nuclear waste site with strontium-90 that's 8 feet under the ground. And those are houses, that's a neighborhood. And if you go into that trail and you go hiking around with a Geiger counter, the way that the specific plant, the rubber rabbit bush, the way that it uptakes calcium is very similar to the way that we uptake calcium. And so it has deep enough roots that it can pull the strontium-90 out of the ground, and it becomes a radioactive plant, which is like just wild to me. It's not like it will hurt you if you touch it or something, but if you have a Geiger counter, it will get recognized that this is a radioactive material. So I started working on a kind of a version of these listeners that will be a Geiger counter, essentially, that you can go out into the world and go try to find radioactive plants in these spaces. There's a lot of them in Santa Fe, New Mexico, especially, where, you know, this nuclear testing was going on. And there's a lot of, you know, nuclear waste there, and especially, you know, a lot of problematics with where those test sites were in relationships with indigenous folks there, and you know, where things got cleaned up, how they got cleaned up, space. There's some amazing artists that are working on remediation work and projects too, if you're interested in this kind of world. Definitely happy to connect you with some folks. So yeah, so I'm just starting this one out. This is how I start them. I usually find a plant or some kind of piece of material that's from that site. So I'm really interested in this idea of site responsiveness, and scan it or photograph it, and I use that as the start. And then I go through using a PCBA software, which is something that like engineers use to lay out circuit boards, which is like the most non-creative tool you could ever possibly use. It's like really a chore. But you know, then you can go through this fabrication process that all of our consumer electronics are made with. It's essentially the same process. And I really like this idea of there just this dedicated device that you can take out into the environment and go have this more single experience. Okay, so I just wanted to give you a little bit of context here because I just completed like a 10-year long dream of mine, and so I'm going to show you this. So I just wanted to give you this is a map of the continental U.S. and all the green is national forest land, and so here's, you know, we're over there, New York, and here's Minnesota over here, and northern Minnesota up there, that big green blob. That's the space I've been spending a lot of time. And right here at this red star, there is where I have spent the last 8 months building a wilderness outpost, which will serve as my studio. I actually closed my studio in Minneapolis about 2 years ago in preparation. And started building a yurt, which is a cylindrical structure. So these are the construction of the Han, which are the walls, and we built all this from the ground up. My partner Sarah and I, and with help from a lot of other folks. So it's a huge process, you know, tons of woodwork, sewing pieces of material that weigh hundreds of pounds. You know, lots of friends. It's like 7 people to help us raise it. And here it is. We just finished it. We haven't even stayed there yet or really spent any time there. Just put it up right before I came out here. So yeah, this will serve as a kind of outpost because otherwise Minneapolis is about 5 hours drive from where I've been working. So I'm making that drive back and forth like every 2 weeks or so for the last decade. So that it looks like inside. And This is, again, where it is. I just wanted to show it on Google Maps, just to give you a kind of a context for this area that I've been working in. You know, it's filled with water, there's tons of lakes. This is all forest. This is a burn scar over here from forest fire. And I just wanted to give you a little hint or a little gesture towards what I'm working on next. This is from a grant proposal, and I'm working on a kind of remote listening post. So thinking about the ways that data scientists often build these custom-made devices that they'll deploy out in the environment in order to make recordings of various things. So sometimes that's, you know, cameras or insects or seismic activity or ppm, parts per million of CO2, all sorts of kinds of recording instruments. But I want to make this thinking about time in the way that I've been thinking about it. And the idea is to make some sort of internet radio station that's either live or that's durational. So last like a year recording and then be played back on a year recording that's in sync with the day that it's playing back, that it was recorded on. And really as a gesture of just thinking about the sounds and the space that is out there right now when I'm not there. I think that that's a really important piece, or when no one else is there, that's you know, a human kind of interfering with the space or being inside of the space. One of the amazing things about the area that I've been working in is that it's a designated quiet sanctuary. So it's one of only, I think now it's like 6 or 7 places in the continental US where you can be somewhere, be in the environment and not hear a human made more than 15 minutes. So like, just think about that, how like profound that is. You can be somewhere and have 15 minutes of non-human noise, like no airplane flying over, no car driving by, not even another voice off in the distance. Like it's kind of just like profound. And I think that being able to both capture that from a kind of preservation, documentation, field recording aspect is interesting, but then this idea of like transporting it to somewhere like this room where we have, you know, kind of the opposite of that going on is also really, really interesting. I think I'll leave it right there.